Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the 7th round of your top 16 of the Victory Road Circuit Spring Series. My name is Ben Kiriakou, joined by the ever fabulous, I'm going to get this right this time, yes, Jamie Boyd on your screen as well. Jamie, we're nearing the end of the day. How have you found it so far? What have been your highlights coming into or getting towards the end of the day now?
I would say probably seeing all the slightly niche Pokemon coming through and being able to put in some work. We've seen it with the Mamoswine previously. We saw the Registeel. We just saw an Azumarill triumph over a Tapu Fini, which I am very, very happy with. Definitely the superior Water Fairy type there. But yeah, we're going to have some more niche picks here coming up. A few Pokemon that only one person has been bringing. So I'm definitely excited to get into this 7th game.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to be bringing up another poll. Yet again, we want to see what you guys think of this player matchup. We have Damiano, of course, on one side versus Yuki. The poll is now open, so everyone cast your votes. Show your support as to who you want to see winning this matchup and going into the top 8 tomorrow. It's gonna be a tight one, actually. I'm looking forward to seeing Yuki playing. Haven't seen him play for a little while. Damiano, definitely a player that's well known in the Victory Road circuit, though.
And not to swear anything, but there is a Porygon Z on one side of the field, and that is a very, very strong Pokemon, so we'll have to see if that's going to be able to put in the work in this game. But once again, it seems like we're getting somewhat of an even split between the chat. Damiano just making a little bit of a push near the end, and just, it seems, picking out Yuki right at the end there. So yeah, definitely some good support coming in for both players here, and still just slight push going for Damiano there, but yeah, it's good to see so much support for both players here.
Definitely, but we'll see if that sways when we go to introduce our players. And of course, we are going to be introducing both players, both teams, as well, and seeing what they're bringing. As you said, Jamie, a little bit more niche pick than that Porygon Z coming out here from Damiano's side of the field. And I haven't seen that since, Series 2, maybe 3, I'm going to say. I don't know. My memory's getting bad in my old age, but yeah, good to see.
Series 6, I think, was the peak for Porygon Z. So
oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, memory definitely not being my best friend here, but some achievements here for Damiano, champion of the VR circuit, spring qualifier number 5, so winning the most recent tournament. Coming in as a qualifier to this particular event. Top 4 in the winter qualifier, of course, in number 3, and top 16 in the VR circuit. Winter qualifier number 1 as well, so a few really good achievements in these brackets. And as I said before, definitely no stranger to the Victory Road streams. Coming out here when we make it to this top 16 stage. But yeah, really offensive team. Porygon Z, Regieleki, Urshifu, and supported by Clefairy, Incineroar, and Rillaboom is definitely something that you have to be wary of going into a match when you see a team preview.
And I believe that Porygon Z was on Damiano's team when he did end up winning that spring qualifier. So definitely a comfort pick for him here. And going to be really interesting to see it come back into this Series 9 format. But we can have now a look at Yuki's team on his side of the field. And he's going to be bringing some Pokemon he is starting to be a bit known for. Going with that slightly slower option, trying to position that Galastria into a position where it can start to do huge damage. And you can see some of his accomplishments there. Yeah, in the top 8 and top 4 in 2 of the different qualifiers for the Victory Road circuit. 1 in the Spring Series, 1 in the Winter Series. He's able to get the top 16 at the Oceania International Championships and able to get top 17 in the 2nd Players' Cup in the North American qualifier. But Mimikyu is a Pokemon we haven't seen for a little while at this point. Being able to reliably set up Trick Room. You do have that Porygon 2 that can definitely set up Trick Room by bulking it out, but Mimikyu being able to take at least 1 guaranteed hit to get that Trick Room up could be very crucial going into this match.
Certainly is, and Mimikyu's a Pokemon that I really associate back in sort of 2017, 2018 days. Kind of fell out of favour a little bit going on when we had some different formats, and certainly not really found its niche too much in many of the series that we've been playing. Of course, we did see a little bit of it shadow sneaking next to some Dragapults early doors about a year ago now, maybe a little bit longer. But it is, definitely a Pokemon to watch out for, and one that doesn't mind taking damage from any of Damiano's attacks at least once. With access to that disguise, so could be the ideal counter here. But Jamie, going into this matchup, what do you think that Damiano has to do to get around that Mimikyu and, more importantly, get around that Trick Room?
He does have the Porygon Z that does want to be going for max strikes as its most powerful option, and of course that doesn't affect the Mimikyu at all. And it looks like that if Trick Room does go up, then it definitely will be benefiting Yuki here. Maybe that Clefairy has something like a Sing to be able to start putting Pokemon to sleep, but outside of that you'd have to start pivoting around your Fake Outs with the Incineroar and the Rillaboom. Maybe the Porygon Z also has Trick Room on its move pool as well, so it can reverse that Trick Room, but otherwise you really just want to be doing as much damage as you can if you are on Damiano's side. Usually that would be to try and just take out the Trick Room setters immediately, and Porygon Z is a strong enough Pokemon that it can do that with the helping hand boost that Clefairy so often provides, but it can't do that in the face of the Mimikyu, so we could be seeing the Mimikyu as the route that Yuki wants to go for if he is opting to set up that Trick Room.
Yeah, certainly the Mimikyu being the option that Yuki has opted for next to that Amoonguss, so going to be very, very difficult for Mimikyu to be knocked out this turn. This Incineroar and Porygon Z coming out for Damiano's side of the field here, and that Intimidate going off, not obviously going to affect the Amoonguss too much, but we'll start to neuter that Mimikyu, and maybe that brings its way into relevance later in the game.
Maybe going for the Max Strike to just KO this Amoonguss here, and then that would let the Incineroar go for the Taunt into the Mimikyu. But because we do have the open team sheets here, both players do know that that Mimikyu is carrying the Mental Herb, so even that sort of play wouldn't end up working out and stopping Trick Room here if that is what Damiano's plan was here. It doesn't really seem like there's any good way of stopping that Trick Room. You probably just have to formulate your game plan accepting Trick Room is going to be going up here. Amoonguss is going to be protecting, not wanting to take any of those Max Strikes, but Porygon Z did not Dynamax here.
No, it didn't indeed, and Fake Out does go from Incineroar into that Amoonguss, and not going to really do too much damage, but here's a way that Trick Room could be getting stopped. There's a little bit of a chance that Dark Pulse from the Porygon Z is going to be going for a flinch. Disguise gets broken, a little bit of chip damage, really good addition in this generation of Pokemon, but Trick Room does go up, and that Amoonguss looks pretty happy to be there right now.
Pretty much just pick whichever Pokemon it wants at this point to go for a Spore into, and you really only have Rillaboom as a switch in on that Spore thanks to its grass typing. So if Yuki is able to guess correctly, if the Rillaboom does switch in whichever slot that is and spores the other one, then he's going to put himself into a really good position. But even still, the Amoonguss really is giving itself free reign here to go for those spores, and you do really want to be getting your Glastrier into that Trick Room, so maybe Yuki wants to try and position himself so he can do that. You could go for still just a very safe Rage Powder and switch the Mimikyu into the Glastrier if you wanted to be making use of your Trick Room very quickly, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a bit of a slower game here. We are seeing the Rillaboom switch in that could be trying to catch a Spore, so we'll have to see if that is what the Amoonguss has go for, and if it did correctly target that Porygon Z.
Yeah, certainly, and I think, you know, it's really down to Yuki to decide which Pokemon he thinks are the real threats. Mimikyu coming out here for Porygon 2. That's not going to enjoy taking a Max Strike if Yuki decided to Spore into the Rillaboom, but it's still going to do quite a bit of damage, and something that Yuki probably would prefer to avoid if he could. We do see a Dynamax coming out here. It is going to be that Porygon Z, since the Rillaboom got switched in for that Incineroar. Porygon Z, if it does manage to land a hit, is going to do a lot of damage, but really up to Yuki, as we said, as to whether or not that happens or not.
It looks like the Spore did go into the Incineroar slot, so this is a Max Strike able to come out from the Porygon Z, and it is one of the strongest moves we have in the game, and it's able to do so much damage to that Amoonguss and knock it out in one shot. So that's Spore gone for Yuki's side of the field straight away. A very good switch for Damiano, getting that Rillaboom in on the correct slot. But that does give the switch in for Yuki to bring in that Glastrier, at least in 3 turns of Trick Room at this point. So maybe a bit of a sacrifice for the Amoonguss. It wasn't a very good position to get those spores, but now you've got your offensive pressure onto the field in that Glastrier. It could take the knockout on the Rillaboom if it wanted to and start getting those Beast Boosts going. Probably not strong enough to take out the Porygon Z in one shot. so maybe you would need a double up in that case to be able to KO the Porygon Z. If it does have close combat, then you probably need to go for close combat instead of max knuckle to get the knockout on the Porygon Z with a combination of Porygon 2. But then at that point, you're not Dynamaxing your Glastrier, and if you miss the knockout, then that could be an easy picking for that Porygon Z.
And missing the knockout is likely to happen now that Incineroar has come in for the Rillaboom, both if Glastrier does go for that Icicle Crash or Max Hailstorm into what was the Rillaboom slot and is now an Incineroar, or if Close Combat comes out and targets the Porygon Z, it doesn't really make any difference. Glastrier, unless it gets a critical hit, is not likely to be picking up a KO this turn, and that's really going to put Yuki behind in as much that he's not going to get those chilling Neigh boosts that Glastrier really wants to start accumulating. But Max Quake coming out here, really good play here for Yuki going into that Incineroar. That's a fantastic read there. Going to be raising the special defense of both Glastrier and Porygon 2, which is going to really help against that Porygon Z on Damiano's side of the field. But man, it's we're still going to see a Max Strike coming out here from the Porygon Z, and oh my god, even further reduced in power from that Eerie Impulse. Max Darkness going to come out from that Porygon Z, and you can just see the effect of a special defense boost and 2 stages of reduced special attack from that Porygon Z. Fantastic turn there for Yuki, just going, yeah, okay, fine, you've taken out my Amoonguss, you got that one right, but I'm not going to let you go any further. I'm just going to stop you dead in your tracks, and I'm going to start getting on the offensive here without allowing myself to take any more damage than I need to.
Yeah, that turn went pretty much as perfectly for Yuki as it could have gone, really putting a stop to that Porygon Z. The Quake boost cancelled out by that Darkness, but at the same time, that's a lost turn of Max Strike that you could have gone for, and you saw how little damage that Max Darkness was able to do to that Porygon 2 thanks to that Eerie Impulse as well, and Max Strike probably isn't going to cut it at this point either. So yeah, really nice turn for Yuki, catching that Incineroar on the switch in. Could potentially try and catch this Rillaboom on the switch in as well. It seems like Damiano is cycling those not the Intimidates, the fake outs around, but Knuckle going into that Incineroar going to hit the Rillaboom reasonably well, as it would have done into that Incineroar and getting that attack boost crucially.
Yeah, indeed, and Rillaboom coming in here is nice. Good defensive play for Damiano, taking that Trick Room and sort of running with it and not allowing it to go, or trying to make it go away without taking too much damage. Of course, we see a Tri-Attack going into the Rillaboom, not doing too much damage, but something respectable. And of course, now we're racking up those special defense drops from the Porygon Z's Max Darkness. Not probably going to be able to go past the Eerie Impulses that are possible for Porygon 2 to launch out here. So, maybe fighting an uphill battle for Damiano, but I think he's just trying to find a way to do as much damage as he can a little bit later than sooner.
And we do have access to Fake Out once again with the Rillaboom switching in, so you could put a stop to that Porygon 2 from going in for any more Tri-Attacks or those Eerie Impulses, but at the same time, you probably want to be switching out your Porygon Z so you can reset those Eerie Impulses. Trick Room is going to be running out pretty soon, and if you can get your Porygon Z back on the field without those minus special attack drops, and outside of Trick Room, you'll still be able to click Hyper Beam, and Hyper Beam is as strong as Max Strike would be. You would just have to take that recharge turn next turn, but that would still be doing a huge amount of damage, especially with those Darkness drops, putting both Pokemon at -1 stages of special defense at this point, cancelling out that Quake very nicely.
Yeah, and Damiano must have been reading your mind there, Jamie, switching out the Porygon Z in favour of Incineroar, bringing another Intimidate onto the field, and I quite like the change of positioning there. Max Quake coming out from the Glastrier, could be going into that Rillaboom, and it is, so Damiano making another really nice read there, but Yuki successfully removing all of those special defense drops that Damiano spent time accumulating, and another Eerie Impulse coming onto the Incineroar, not really going to make any particular difference, but we are getting towards the end of Trick Room now, and it does look like Damiano's going to bring himself into a position where he can attack both the Porygon 2 and the Glastrier, especially while the Porygon 2 has had that Eviolite knocked off and isn't going to have the defense boosts that it's so well known for coming from it.
And unlike that, Mimikyu is not going to be carrying the Mental Herb, so it's completely open to a taunt from the Incineroar if it does opt to go for that. and Yuki didn't really manage to make use of his Glastria Dynamax as well as you usually like to. You want to be starting to stack those chilling nays as you pick up knockouts with your Dynamax Glastria, and he wasn't able to pick up any knockouts at all with those 3 turns of Dynamax. A nice play catching the Incineroar on the first turn, but then not really able to capitalize too much, trying to predict again the Incineroar, but getting the incorrect slot at that point with the Max Quake. And now that the Trick Room is over, Damiano is looking in a pretty nice position, especially because he can stop the Trick Room this turn, and when the Mimikyu comes back in, its disguise is broken at this point, so it would be open to a double up potential from Damiano's Pokemon to be able to pick up the knockout. And that Porygon 2, even if it doesn't get taunted, probably could be in range with the knocked off Eviolite to be KO'd by these Pokemon on Damiano's side of the field, but it doesn't look like he's going to be going for that. Instead, he is going to be taunting that Porygon 2 and just knocking off the Assault Vest with the Rillaboom.
Yeah, that's a really nice knockoff to get. It's going to make that Glastria really a lot easier to be able to get knocked out. High horsepower coming into the Incineroar doesn't quite pick up the KO there, so I think that's going to be quite good there for Damiano. Now that he's knocked off and done a bit of damage to Glastria, that Incineroar is probably going to be able to finish the job if Damiano so chooses. The other thing that we haven't seen is Damiano's last Pokemon here, and if it is that Regieleki, that knockoff with the Assault Vest coming away from the Glastria is going to be really crucial with how well that Glastria is going to last on the field.
Any Pokemon in the back for Damiano would be beneficial here. If it was the Urshifu, you're tracking down that Porygon 2 in the Glastria with a super effective close combat as well. And yeah, just really nice positioning for Damiano here. Keeping the Incineroar on the field, not being KO'd by that double up, means that if you wanted to, you can either go for a parting shot, cycle out that Intimidate, or you can just go on the offensive and go for the Flare Blitz into the Glastria. You know it's got the Assault Vest, you know that it can't protect, and that Flare Blitz would be guaranteed into that slot.
Certainly is, and Porygon 2 wanting to reset all of its stats, coming out in favor of the Mimikyu just to take a U-turn. Quad resisted on that, so it doesn't take any damage really at all from the Rillaboom's U-turn, and is going to switch out into the last Pokemon for Damiano, or that Porygon Z. We do have the Glastria still on the field, hasn't switched out yet, so we know that it will be taking a potential attack from the Incineroar, and it's going to be that Flare Blitz going straight into it, possibly enough to pick up the knockout. Not quite. That could be a problem actually for Damiano now that Incineroar has been knocked out by that. Any attack that the Glastria goes for is going to be redirected into that Porygon Z. Good for Damiano that it was that high horsepower and not the close combat, which likely would have been seen on this on an Assault Vest set, since you have the offensive space, and doesn't pick up the knockout there. And Yuki's really struggling to do damage here.
Yeah, we did see the Knuckle come out from the Glastria, so did have access to that close combat. And based on the high horsepower, damage would have probably been enough on the Porygon Z, so probably opting to try and not drop the defenses of the Glastria, but if that was the attack, that would have knocked out the Porygon Z. Now it is still on the field, and the Urshifu is the last Pokemon for Damiano here. You could potentially just double up onto this Mimikyu. Dark Pulse and a Surging Strikes is almost certainly going to be enough to KO this Mimikyu, or you could just pick up the knockout on that Glastria whenever you want. So wouldn't be surprised to see Damiano trying to stop Trick Room here. If Yuki somehow gets Trick Room back up and Glastria is still around, that could be a way back into this match, but so long as Trick Room does not get put onto the field, Damiano should have enough firepower to take this game.
Certainly should, and yeah, that Porygon 2 coming back in, if it is going to be a close combat going into the Glastria, nothing that Yuki could have done about that, but it is going to be that Surging Strikes, as you mentioned, probably going to be going into that Mimikyu, I would imagine. Yes, it is, doing a good chunk of damage with each hit, but not enough to pick up the KO on its own, so we'll need the help of that Porygon, as you mentioned earlier, Jamie, and Dark Pulse does indeed land into the Mimikyu, and it's going to be a knockout there. Unfortunately for Yuki, there's no way for Yuki to protect against any of the attacks that Urshifu has in its arsenal, thanks to that Unseen Fist ability. And so, you know, if Damiano is going to be able to choose exactly what he targets down with each move, and yeah, especially with that Assault Vest gone from the Glastria and it being at such low health, likelihood is that close combat's going to knock out the Porygon 2. Dark Pulse or Hyper Beam going to knock out the Glastrier, and it'll be game 1 to Damiano.
Yeah, with that AVO like knocked off earlier, the close combat definitely going to be enough to KO this Porygon 2 here. And then the Dark Pulse should pick up the game for the Glastrier. So Yuki does need to position his Glastrier maybe into a position in Trick Room where he can start picking up those knockouts. That was the crucial thing here for the Glastrier. You want to be picking up those KOs, you want to be getting those chilling nates going. Even when it was out of the Dynamax and it went for that high horsepower onto the Incineroar, that could have been a chilling nade boost that would have been given to the Glastrier, but instead Incineroar able to just hang on from that move, and that just means that there was no boost. Incineroar could do whatever it wants. It got that massive Flare Blitz, put it in range of whatever Damiano wanted to go for. So really nicely played from Damiano coming out here.
Very much so, and I think, you know, a real crucial turn was that turn 1 where the Amoonguss got knocked out by Max Strike and wasn't able to get a Spore off in Trick Room. And we said at the time, you know, that Amoonguss looks really nice, in a nice position there, able to just get Spores off wherever it really wanted to. And you mentioned at the time, Jamie, that Rillaboom was the switch in. Turned out it definitely was, and Damiano switched it into the right slot there. So, you know, a real change of positioning there could have helped Yuki if you just Spore into the slot that's really threatening to the whole of your team, which is that Porygon Z, maybe you have a little bit more of a chance. Instead, what happened was the Amoonguss got knocked out and Yuki just struggled to get through that Intimidate. And I think that's one of the things that Glastrier really struggles with. If it doesn't get going, it really doesn't get going. So going into game 2 now, what do you think, Jamie, Yuki needs to do to position both his Trick Room a little bit better and get that Glastrier into a good position?
Seems like he does have a very guaranteed Trick Room if he chooses to go for it. Mimikyu Amoonguss, I don't think there's any way outside of that Dark Pulse flinch that could have happened. Really, there's not any true ways of stopping because of that Mental Herb. Even the taunt from the Incineroar will not stop that Mimikyu from being able to get out the Trick Room. Maybe if you go for something like a Urshifu and a Porygon to be able to KO the Mimikyu, but then you've still just got the redirection of the Amoonguss. So able to get out the Trick Room guaranteed, but needs to be able to make use of it, both with the Spores from the Amoonguss. If you get the correct slot with the Spores, that's putting a stop to any attacks that can come out from Damiano's side of the field, or just making use of that Glastrier a bit better. We were able to call the Incineroar switching and get the Quake, but it wasn't strong enough. And then you were just able to get that Intimidate onto the Glastrier, and that effectively put a stop to it because it was put to the -1 stage to special. Stage of attack and wasn't able to reboost back up. It did go for that Knuckle on the second turn, but it really needs to start stacking those boosts. When you run a very supported team around the Glastrier and your Glastrier is your main focus of damage output, you need the Glastrier to be doing the damage output. And in the first game, it just really wasn't cutting it.
Well, I think that you mentioned about the Incineroar, the Glastrier wasn't able to just cut through that Incineroar in the switch, and I think a lot of that is to do with, one, how Damiano's trained his Pokemon, but also the item choice being Citrus Berry. Looked like that Max Quake did just over half, and that's really not a damage range that you want to be when you're facing down an opponent with Citrus Berry. Just does enough to bring you out of KO range the second time and just keep you cycling at that round. I think the question for me is whether or not that Yuki can leverage that Regieleki a little bit more, put on his own offensive pressure, given that we didn't see Clefairy go to that match at all in the last game for Damiano, so no redirect there, and Regieleki on Yuki's side of the field, if that remains consistent from Damiano, does look like it could offer some opportunity to just do quite a bit of damage, especially to that Porygon 2, before Porygon Z, in fact, does what Porygon Z does. But looks like it's going to be that Incineroar and Porygon 2 coming in for Yuki's side of the field, and Incineroar and Porygon Z coming out for Damiano, exactly the same as the last game for him, but a little bit of a switch up here for Yuki.
Yeah, we've got the Incineroars here, and then father and son on both sides of the field with the Z and the 2 of the Porygons. So a little bit of a switch up here. Did opt to lead with that Porygon 2, so could potentially get taunted by the Incineroar, but then you do lead with Incineroar as well on Yuki's side of the field, so that you could fake out that Incineroar and put a stop to that taunt. So very interesting switch up there, being able to still put a stop to the taunt that could come out from the Incineroar on Damiano's side of the field. Still seems like a somewhat guaranteed Trick Room if you do opt to go for that fake out into the opposing Incineroar, which is exactly what we see.
Yeah, the Incineroar from Yuki's side of the field outspeeding the Incineroar Damiano's, and a nasty plot here coming from the Porygon Z. So, yeah, definitely going on the offensive here, but Porygon 2 does successfully get up Trick Room here, and yeah, wasn't expecting to see that with the way that these Incineroars matched up. Both players forgetting the gentleman's rule of fake out, that you don't fake out a fake outer, but working out very well here for Yuki.
Yeah, that could have been very bad if the Incineroar on Damiano's side of the field was able to fake out the Porygon 2 before the fake out from Yuki's side of the field, and then the Porygon Z would have been nasty plotted up outside of Trick Room, but at least this time it is in that Trick Room and would be able to still do massive amount of damage. The Eerie Impulse could cancel out that nasty plot, but then it would still be back to neutral, and we've seen how strong Porygon Z is. It would still be able to put out a lot of damage.
Certainly would, and with the way that these Incineroars are trained, Yuki's Incineroar would come out afterwards, so you can't even taunt an Amoonguss on the switch in unless it's a hard switch. But Protect here coming out from the Porygon Z, and Eerie Impulse going into it, so taunt correctly coming out here from Damiano going into that Porygon Z, stopping the opportunity for Yuki to just drop that special attacker. But I think it's going to be quite difficult if Yuki brings in that Amoonguss. Even that Galastria, it would be in a great position to start doing some real offensive work. But is that Amoonguss? And now that Porygon Z on Damiano's side of the field is really threatened by Spore.
Yeah, you still got that Rillaboom that could switch in for Damiano's side of the field, but you do need to still call that correctly. It's going to be very awkward if you do incorrectly call that with the Spore switch in. Then your other Pokemon's going to go to sleep, and that will still be a really good position for Yuki.
Definitely, and the question is how do you call it the second time in a row? Because that Porygon Z's got a nasty plot up. You can't suppress it with any other moves. It's really going to be quite difficult to move in front of it. So we do see that Porygon Z. So Rillaboom does come in for that Porygon Z and is potentially going to be taking the Spore here. We'll have to see what is going on here. It does go into the Rillaboom though, so yeah, Damiano making the correct call once again. Tri-Attack coming into the Incineroar, doing a little bit of damage, and Incineroar just getting that parting shot off onto the Porygon 2, just lowering its damage output. But now we're going to get Damiano in a position where the Rillaboom's on the field, not doing loads, maybe going to be able to get a knockoff onto that Porygon 2, but Porygon Z and anything else on Damiano's side of the field that's next to the Rillaboom is going to be the target of a Spore from that Amoonguss, and not really that much that Damiano can do about that. So we'll have to see, how that ends up going into the sort of final stages of Trick Room. Maybe when Trick Room expires, how many Pokemon Damiano has asleep, and that might make a real impact as to whether Yuki's able to set up that Trick Room again, potentially, and try and be a little bit more offensive with Galastria, or in fact go on the offensive in the final turns of Trick Room and start maybe bringing that Rillaboom down with the Incineroar that's just come in and dropped Intimidate onto the field. And yeah, gonna be a difficult one to call. Fake out though coming out onto the Amoonguss from the Rillaboom, and now the nasty plot comes onto the field, and I think there's quite limited turns of Trick Room left, so now we are going to be in a position where that Porygon Z may be able to last to the tail end of Trick Room, may be able to start firing off these big attacks in its Dynamax form at the end of the game. We'll have to see.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting to see here. You've got that Rillaboom on the field, so you know that the Spore would be guaranteed into the Porygon Z if you were going to opt for that. So definitely an interesting position here for both of the players. You still need to be able to get that Galastria into a position to be able to do all of the damage you need. You've got the Incineroar and Amoonguss, and that's definitely some good support going to be coming out for Yuki's side of the field to try and position for that. So definitely needs to be still thinking ahead to try and get that Galastria onto the field in the position it needs to be.
Yeah, certainly, and Porygon Z going for a protect, not wanting to take any damage this turn, not wanting to take a Spore either that comes out from the Amoonguss, and Incineroar going for the parting shot into that Rillaboom, going to be lowering Rillaboom's attack and special attack by 1 stage and switching out back to Yuki. So opportunity here to bring in the Glastrier, maybe even the Mimikyu in preparation for the Trick Room or the Porygon 2, depending on which one Yuki is in favour of at this point in the game. Clearly a little bit of a decision to be made here, as Yuki's taking as much time as he can really to make his decision. We are still communicating, so yeah, it'll have to see what these players come back with. But that Porygon Z, I think, is going to be in a position very soon where it's going to be putting on some real pressure, and I think that's going to be the most important thing that Yuki has to consider while deciding which Pokemon he's bringing in, and that Pokemon that he's decided on is Porygon 2.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that Yuki took all this time to be able to decide what he was going to do, because of the side of team that he's bringing. You are playing a very positional game. You're trying to get that Glastrier into position to be able to do all the damage. So opting to go for the Porygon 2 here, as the Rillaboom is U-turning out back into that Incineroar. So Fake Out pressure is going to be back on the field for this turn.
Certainly is, and the question is you know, is this enough? Is this, you know, we've had the Lasty plot onto the Porygon Z. We're going to have potential for Eerie Impulse, but now we've got Fake Out on the field from Incineroar. Looks like Damiano's got himself in a position where, you know, it doesn't really... he's got that 2+ boost on his Porygon Z, and he's going to be able to start launching that into things as he so pleases. And that's going to be quite difficult for Yuki to handle, I think.
Yeah, with a plus 2 stages of increased special attack on Porygon Z, there's almost nothing in the format that would be able to take that attack. And we know that the Mimikyu didn't come to this game because it is in the Incineroar instead. So really, that Porygon Z just has its choice of target with the Max Strikes coming out here. By cycling that Incineroar back onto the field, you do have that Fake Out pressure. The Amoonguss would not be able to redirect at all. And Porygon 2 does not carry Protect here, so you just Fake Out the Amoonguss, and something in that slot, whether it's the Porygon 2 that stays in or the Incineroar or Glastrier that could switch in, would be KO at this point. And it looks like that Yuki is going to most likely be sacrificing that Porygon 2 to this Dynamax Max Strike coming out from the Porygon Z. Maybe would have to Dynamax the Porygon 2 at this point so that it would be able to survive. But even then, with these kind of teams, you want to be Dynamaxing the Glastrier instead. But really, that would be your only option of letting the Porygon 2 survive the Porygon Z. And we are seeing the Dynamax coming out from Yuki's side of the field.
I'm just going for Big Mushroom. That's what I want to see right now. But no, not Big Mushroom, Big Duck instead. Porygon 2 goes into his Dynamax form, so yeah, likely, as you say, Jamie, to want to be starting to just take some of these damage. It almost certainly is going to take the hit from Porygon Z, but unfortunately it does feel a little bit like too little too late, especially now as Max Strike goes into the Porygon 2 from Porygon Z. It's going to do a lot of damage.
That is a lot of damage. It's not quite a knockout, but that is still a lot of damage, leaving the Porygon 2 super low.
Yeah, and you know, Max Strike's traded, not going to really make too much difference. Damiano's team is definitely the faster of the two with the way that it's built, but unfortunately for Yuki, there's the opportunity here for Damiano to just do exactly the same thing, but with a taunt instead of a Fake Out, and stop that Amoonguss from really doing too much. Even if you know, Damiano wants to change up his targeting a little bit, just make sure that Amoonguss goes down, could just launch a Max Strike into it and knock out the Porygon 2 with the Incineroar potentially. So, you know, lots of options there for Damiano. Unfortunately, probably not a lot of options for Yuki with all of this offensive pressure in front of him.
And at this point, you really are in the driving seat if you're Damiano, because the Dynamax was necessary to allow the Porygon to survive. That means that there is no Dynamax available for the Glastrier that would be waiting in the back. So at this point, you can just go for the Max Strike into the Amoonguss slot. It did just protect, would need a double protect to not be knocked out here. And if it doesn't go for that or doesn't get it, then that slot is being KO'd as well. Could potentially be in range of a Flare Blitz for the Porygon 2. But it looks like the Incineroar is going to be the sacrifice here for Yuki, as that is definitely not able to survive a Max Strike. As assuming the Max Strike does go into that Amoonguss, it could still very easily go into that Porygon 2 to put a stop to the Dynamax turns of Yuki's side of the field.
Certainly, and Max Strike going to be coming out, is going to be landing into that Incineroar, and yeah, no calculation necessary there, especially not with a critical hit, man. We've seen a little bit of overkill this today, but man, that is definitely overkill. Incineroar though does go for the parting shot, going to be content to just drop down the offensive presence of Porygon 2, and I'm not sure how I feel about that, given that those Max Strikes have been racking up on Yuki's, on Damiano's side of the field as well as Yuki's, but you know, they're swapping these things around. If Amoonguss comes in, there's a potential that Amoonguss, depending on how Yuki's trained it, could outspeed the Porygon Z. Maybe. Unlikely, but I think there's just like a little bit of a way in there.
Well, you do opt to go for very slow Pokemon because you've got 2 Trick Room setters. You do have that very fast Regieleki, but you do opt to run very slow Pokemon if your main strategy is going for that Trick Room. So the Max Strikes are nice to reduce the speed of that Porygon Z. Probably the Porygon 2 would probably have the most chance of still outspeeding that Porygon Z if it wasn't being Max Striked itself. Yeah. But Amoonguss and Glastrier probably aren't going to be outspeeding this Porygon Z either. Still does have the option to just go for any Max Strike that it wants to. Whether that's into the Porygon 2 or the Amoonguss doesn't even really matter at this point. If the Amoonguss goes for Protect, you're still going to do a lot of damage to it. Yeah. And then maybe the Max Strike KOs the Porygon Z if you're the Porygon 2, but then Damiano still has so much firepower left in the tank, so it's still looking very rough for Yuki here.
Definitely rough indeed, and yeah, we'll see what these trainers decide to do. There is the Protect coming out from Yuki's Amoonguss, going to just reduce some of the damage, and that is a double Protect. Actually quite like that play there. May give the option for Yuki to go for a Trick Room next time if this Amoonguss does hang on, which yeah, it does just about, with, to be fair, quite a respectable amount of health left. So if the Trick Room does manage to come up this turn, remember that, you know, Hyper Beam, if that's what Damiano goes for, can miss. Dark Pulse probably would be enough to pick up the knockout on Amoonguss on Yuki's side of the field. And yeah, it just comes down then to whether Porygon 2 gets knocked out by this Rillaboom or not, which I guess is probably pretty likely at this range.
Yeah, it makes sense what Yuki's going for. Trick Room would be his only way back into this game at this point. Maybe having to hope for either a Hyper Beam miss or a Dark Pulse not being strong enough to KO the Amoonguss, but with 2 stages of increased special attack, still probably going to be enough. But the knockoff is going to be going first into that Porygon 2 and was strong enough anyway. Of course, ignoring the Rage Powder because of the Grass typing, but because it was strong enough to KO, there wasn't really any way back into this match for Yuki here, because Dark Pulse still strong enough to KO that Amoonguss there, not having to risk the accuracy of the Hyper Beam. And now there is most likely going to be that Glastrier left in the back, but against the rest of Damiano's Pokemon and not in Trick Room.
You know, watching that health bar go down there, I really wasn't sure whether or not that knockoff was going to be enough to do the job. Fortunately for Damiano, it was. Looks like Damiano is definitely going to be progressing to the next stage of the tournament. Wouldn't be surprised to see that Porygon Z protecting and a knockoff to remove the Assault Vest, but Yuki knows what the score is. He's going to be forfeiting, taking the gentleman's approach and deciding that enough is enough. That's the end of the game, and no way that really that Glastrier had a way to come back on its own. So really well played to both players there. But again, you know, I think it just comes down to these sort of matchups where one player's just had just that bit of an edge over the other, and in their team compositions. And when you're playing a Trick Room team like Yuki was, and you go up against a team like Damiano's, you've got to either get that Trick Room up and start breaking through your opponent's team, or just not, you know. And unfortunately, if you can't do that, that's curtains for you, I'm afraid, in this sort of format.
Yeah, for Yuki's team, it does very rely heavily on the Glastrier being the main source of damage outputs, and you need to be able to position it into Trick Room or in a position where it can start snowballing those chilling nade boosts. And unfortunately, in both of the games, Yuki was not able to do that in either game. The Trick Room was able to be set up, but still was able to power through on Damiano's side of the field. Nasty Plot being very crucial there to be able to pick up those guaranteed one-hit knockouts on the Pokemon on Yuki's side of the field. And when Mimikyu wasn't brought to game 2, that meant the Max Strike was completely free.
Yeah, and you know, as you said, Jamie, after the Nasty Plot, there's really nothing in the format that wants to take those Max Strikes from Porygon Z, and it just creates this target on the field. It puts a target on Porygon Z as to say, if you don't deal with me, I'm going to deal with you. And that's really what Yuki fell into the trap of, really. You saw Damiano switch out quite consistently into Spores from Amoonguss on Yuki's side of the field. I think that could have been a real game changer in both games 1 and 2. Just being able to get one Spore successfully would have just slowed down Damiano, I think, enough for Yuki to start getting the upper hand, but it just never quite happened. Yuki never quite got the traction that he needed, and certainly could have been his game if that was the case. And so really well played there to Damiano, but well played to Yuki as well. I mean, he played a lot of the outs that he had. We saw Big Duck come in at the end of that game, and something I really like to see. Really, that game probably was over at the point that Porygon 2 Dynamax, because you're not Dynamaxing your Glastrier, but I still like to see the effort and, Yuki really playing for the win rather than playing not to lose. And I really like that about how Yuki approached the format, approached the set, should I say.
Yeah, I would have liked to see the Dynamax Amoonguss in that game instead of the Porygon 2, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. And it does look like the Damiano will be advancing into tomorrow's top 8. So we're going to cut to a very short break, and then we'll be back with the very final 8th game of this top 16 of the Victory Road Spring Series.